trying to free your mind, Neo.
Before we get started, I just want to explain a little bit about what the presentation is and about how I came to do the work that I'm doing today. So I'm originally from Johannesburg, South Africa, but when I was 14, I moved to the United States. And it took me on a crazy, crazy journey about what's going on in our world. And what's going on in our world is similar to The Matrix. How many people here have seen that movie? Okay, everybody has seen it. So you have more or less an understanding of the concept behind it, which is that there's a citizenry and they're plugged into this thing called the Matrix, which is a huge computer that's exploiting people. And of course, that's an analogy for the world that we live in today. Now, when I first grew up here, like a lot of people from Johannesburg, I came from a very difficult and rough background. My parents were both alcoholics. My dad actually had a crack habit, but they changed. They're amazing people today. But I found over the years, through a lot of research, that the difficulty that I experienced in my life, and that other people experience, that they grow up into, that stuff is preventable. And it's rooted in this system. And what you're going to find, and it's very disturbing, is that it's actually intentional. Now, throughout this presentation, I need you guys to please do me a very big favor. Have an open mind. Nobody knows everything. It's not possible. Every single one of us are ignorant in one way or another. It's not a bad thing, but we need to acknowledge that. And we have to be willing to at least try to challenge our current perception of the world. Because I imagine that the people that are here today suspect something is a bit strange. So it's imperative that while we are going through all of this, that you guys keep an open mind. And if you feel, because you might feel offended, you might feel the impulse to reject what you're seeing. Because we all have a conditioned reaction about certain things. So during this process, I want you to do your best to just keep yourself calm, keep yourself relaxed, and let me get through the entire presentation. Now, if afterwards you have questions about anything, then I'll answer them, but at the end of the presentation. Now, some of the stuff is going to be so overwhelming for everybody, or for some of you. I don't know how deep down the proverbial rabbit hole each of you have gone. But it's also going to be recorded, as you can see. So while it's being recorded, if there's anything that you would like to explore further, you can just go check it out in the video. And the last thing is I want you to question and fact check what I'm saying. I'm going to provide sources for everything because I take facts very seriously. I don't really like to deal with theories if I don't have to. I prefer to deal with facts. Okay, slide. All right, this was a global study conducted by Gallup in more than 140 countries. It's called State of the Global Workforce. And what they found, they surveyed millions of employees all over the world. And they found that 87% of people worldwide are not content with their jobs. That's a staggering statistic. And a lot of us, more or less, already know that about the workplace. But to see it set in stone in more than 140 countries, it kind of puts it into perspective. Slide. Monday mornings, worldwide, and these studies have been corroborated over and over and over. The most prevalent time of week to get a heart attack is Monday morning. Multiple studies have demonstrated this. So this is pretty self-evident, right? The workplace is a very stressful environment. And then it puts into perspective as well that the stress that we're dealing with on an individual level, it's actually going on collectively. Slide. But it's not just the workplace. Suicide is the biggest killer of teenage girls worldwide. It's very disturbing, from 15 to 19. So it's actually not a workplace-related issue alone. Slide, please. South Africa has the 8th highest suicide rate in the world. Unfortunately, some people here may even know personally somebody who has committed suicide. And that means that somebody is so stressed out by this world, by this reality, that they see no other escape. I know this because I went through a path in my own life where I was so depressed, where I was so stressed out that I had suicidal thoughts. And what people don't realize is that you just want to escape your pain, but you can't because it's inside yourself. Slide. Again, suicide accounts for 17% of all deaths in South Africa. That is a mind-blowing statistic. That means almost 2 out of every 10 people that we know are potentially going to die from suicide. Slide, please. Leading cause of death among teenage girls. We'll go over the slide. It's the second leading cause of death worldwide for 15 to 29, which is a significant demographic in here. Slide. It's an epidemic. So stress is clearly a big problem in our society. So that's something that we are struggling with on an individual level. We can see this is a global problem. The workplace, teenagers, it's everywhere. And we have to become consciously aware of that, because what's taking place on the individual level, people are being diagnosed with depression or this disorder or anxiety, and then they're getting treated with medications. But it's actually a healthy response to this environment. It's clearly not that there's something wrong with everybody. This is an expression that if all the flowers in your garden are dying, you check the soil that they're growing in. You don't go up to each plant and say there's something wrong with you. ADHD, Ritalin, anxiety, antidepressant, whatever. Slide. Stress is related to the top 2 deaths in the world. Heart disease and strokes. These are the 2 leading causes, hands down, by far. The rest of them don't even come close. Slide. But is this a part of human nature? Because we're all stressed out. We're all depressed. But do you see anything in a child that shows that they are stressed out naturally? Right? When you observe a child, what do you see? Carefree, happy, enjoying life, optimistic. And that was all of us at one point. Even if you had a difficult childhood, you still had those moments, full of life. So how do we go from that, slide, to that? Monday morning, going to a job that we despise, and we have a heart attack. How does that happen? Surely there is something going on in society on a global scale for this to take place. This isn't just an isolated incident. It's not happening to one person or 10 people or a certain race or a certain ethnicity or a certain country. It's happening globally. Slide, cousin. And this leads me to what I consider the most important study of our time. A mind-blowing study conducted by this man, George Land, called Breakpoint and Beyond. One of the most insightful studies ever done about actual human nature. And what George Land and them did was they were approached by NASA. Now, everybody knows NASA, yeah, right? Everybody knows NASA. It's the world's foremost authority, basically, on space programs. Some very bright individuals work for NASA. And what they wanted to do is develop a test that could measure the creative potential and the problem-solving skills of their rocket scientists and engineers. And they had no idea how they were going to do this. So they approached George Land, because that's his specialty. And over a course of time, they came up with a divergent thinking test. Has anybody seen the movie Divergent? Okay. In the movie, the whole concept is this woman, this young lady, she can adapt in multiple ways. She can't be put in a box. A divergent thinking test, or the concept of divergent thinking, is that you can come up with a solution, multiple solutions, to a particular problem. And they gave it to NASA, and the results were brilliant. They could pinpoint who their very best rocket scientists and engineers were. But what they found about the study was that it was actually so simple, they could apply it to any age group. So they thought, okay, well, let's give this to the age group of 3 to 5-year-olds, and let's see how they do. Out of all of these kids, I think it was 2,500 or 1,500, somewhere in that vicinity, 98% of them scored in the top tier, which is considered genius. 98%. Now, they were fascinated by this, so they decided to turn it into a longitude study, which means you take a particular group, and then over a course of time, you test them again. So 5 years from then, by now they had started school. Slide. And what they found was 4 to 5 or 10 years old was more or less around 10 years old, because it was 4 to 5 years old, the first group. 30% of them scored at genius level. Did it again, now in high school, 12%. Adults, age of 31 years, average age. They've tested over 1 million people. Again, not an isolated incident. 2% of us scored at genius level. Again, this is self-evident. We go from being innate creative geniuses to being dumbed down. So what's going on here? Well, it's relatively clear to me, and I think a lot of people know this intuitively. I mean, I knew it in the school system. When you go there, they're just kind of drumming you down. Yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir, teaching you how to conform, teaching you obedience to authority. So we go from these creative, imaginative geniuses, and then we go through the school system, and we end up being little drones, which prepares us for the larger system. So this is the beginning stages of the matrix-like system. Now this leads me to the history of compulsory education, because I'm somebody that I like context. I like to understand things. I like to reverse engineer them. I don't want to just say, oh, the education system is messed up because I think it is. No, I want to look into the history of it and say, where did this come from? How did this start? And that takes us to a place called Prussia, which was a Germanic kingdom. Now, to put it in perspective, think of it like New York or Texas in North America. That's a state. Prussia was a standalone state, and then it became what we know today as Germany. Now, what actually facilitated this process, they became a very strong global power, was their induction of the compulsory education system. Compulsory education has not been around forever. It's not that old of a system. What took place was in 1806 at something called the Battle of Jena, between the Prussian military professionals. They were a military power, similar to the United States today. They went to war with Napoleon. And Napoleon had a bunch of amateur fighters, but they beat the professional army. And then they said, okay, we have to make the compulsory system even better. We need to improve it, because we can't have this outcome again. This individual over here, as you can see, I'm going to always list the sources. I want you guys to fact check. Don't ever believe what somebody says blindly. The new education must consist essentially in this, that it completely destroys freedom of will. If you want to influence him at all, you must do more than merely talk to him. You must fashion him, and fashion him in such a way that he simply cannot will otherwise than you wish him to will. This quote has not been taken out of context in any way, shape, or form. And from this school system, once they implemented it, it had great results for this matrix-like system. Had excellent results for this system. And as a result, it went worldwide. Elements of it are also in South African society. Now, a teacher by the name, he's a lifelong teacher. He's one of the champions of reform in the education system. He's trying to improve it. His name is John Taylor Gatto. And he's a multiple award-winning teacher, both on the local level and the state level in the United States. And he wrote a very concise history on compulsory education and how it's always been used from its inception as actually a mechanism of indoctrination. It's never been used to empower us. And he writes on the compulsory education system, on the three-tier system that they had, which is a private one at the very top for the elite of the society, so-called elite, because there's nothing elite about them in my opinion, and then a middle, and then the bottom. Now, as you can see at the top, he says they learn to think strategically, contextually, in wholes. They learn complex processes and useful knowledge. That's important, useful knowledge. Because most of us, we don't know useful knowledge. We know about the Kardashians and we know about all this other crap, but we don't know useful knowledge. Studied history, and that's authentic history. Wrote copiously, argued often. That's another big one. Most of us, we don't actually know how to even have a simple conversation with other people. Have you ever tried to have a conversation where there's a little bit of conflict? You don't want to do it, right? Because we haven't been trained or educated how to do it. They, on the other hand, they have been. They go to schools to learn how to public speak. It's not inborn. It's not natural. Argued often, read deeply, and mastered tasks of command. Now, the second tier, they learned in a superficial fashion how to think in context, but mostly learning how to manage materials, men, and situations, to be problem solvers. This group would also staff the various policing functions of the state. So these are the politicians who we generally think actually run society. They don't. And you can see over there the policymakers, very top. And the other ones, engineers, architects, doctors, lawyers, government officials, etc. What we think is a good job, right? You know, people always say, go to school and get a good job. The truth of the matter is we have the creative ability to change this whole system. It's inborn. We have the imagination to do that. But instead we go into the system, and not only are we being conditioned to accept it, but to serve it. And then the bottom one, they learned obedience, cooperation, and correct attitudes, along with rudiments of literacy and official state myths of history. And this is the overwhelming majority of the population. Like I said, the sources over there, you guys can check it out. An Underground History of American Education, page 167, page 168. Now, this system also went to the United States, because like any other good idea that can control people, it gets innovated, it gets expanded upon. This was the 28th President of the United States of America, Woodrow Wilson. And he said, again, nothing is put out of context here, we want one class of persons to have a liberal education, and we want another class of persons, a very much larger class of necessity in every society, to forego the privilege of a liberal education and fit themselves to perform specific difficult manual tasks. This was the result of the Industrial Revolution. Okay? Elitists like the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, they saw that they needed to mold their workforce, their future workforce. Because at the end of the day, these big banks, these big corporations, they are built on our energy. They're not preeminent. Not one person didn't build those things up. They just know how to exploit our natural ability. And yeah, is a perfect example. How many people have ever heard of this school? Nobody, right? This is an elite school, the Institut Les Roses. I think it's in Switzerland, if I remember correctly. And now I'm going to show you some people that came from this school. All of these people who we think are maybe enemies, who come from different walks of life, are actually coming from the same school. Princess of Greece. This guy over here, they claim he's a direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. The Shah of Iran. Now, for people who don't know who the Shah of Iran was, in the past, there was a guy by the name of Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran in 1953. People loved him, named Time Magazine's Man of the Year. And he was going to nationalize the oil fields that were controlled by the British government, and what we know today is BP, British Petroleum. And he came with a reasonable plan, that he was going to compensate those private corporations, but he wanted the wealth to go to the Iranian people, because they were very, very poor. They were being exploited in a big way. And what they did was the MI6 and the Central Intelligence Agency, they overthrew him. This was a democratically elected government. And they installed this man, the Shah of Iran. Brutal dictator, massive crimes against humanity took place under his regime. And this is where a lot of the animosity between Iran and the United States can be traced back to. Next slide, please. King of the Belgians. Next slide, please. King of Spain. Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. This guy was actually also the foreign ambassador to the United States during the reign of the Shah of Iran. These people went to school together. Yugoslavia, Prince of Yugoslavia, slide. King of the Belgians, slide. This is the House of Borghese, aristocrats, very powerful family. Look at founded 1266. They've been conducting good business in the background since that time. Talking about now people who are really in control of things. Slide, please. House of Hohenzollern. These were the individuals that the mandatory system under pressure began. Slide. The Duke of Kent. Slide. Prince of Venice. Slide. Archduchess of Austria, Royal Princess of Hungary, Bohemia, and Croatia. Duke of Luxembourg. Pahlavi, this is an Iranian elite family. One of the Rockefellers. And of course, the infamous House of Rothschild. These people all went to the same school together, guys. Clearly, there's something being taught at their schools that's not being taught at our schools, right? There's clearly something going on here.
I went to the wrong school.
Exactly. Slide. And this leads us, because there's a number of ways to control a population, to indoctrinate them. It's not just the education system. Okay, by today's standards, the education system it's in its infancy. It's not even, it still serves its purpose, but to indoctrinate a population, it's not that much. And we have the advertising industry. Now, this is a real ad. Obviously, it's kind of simplistic. You can perceive it very easily. But with public relations and advertising, it's predicated largely upon subliminal messages, things that we can't even read into. Another low level of propaganda here. So this was back in the day. Now, scientific evidence on the effects of smoking. This was a real ad. Now, this is obviously low level propaganda. But back then, because it was highly profitable, cigarettes came around. They were able to do this because they didn't have the knowledge that we have today that cigarettes and cancer go hand in hand. This is a real photo, Photoshop. Young girls and women all around the world are being presented with images of unattainable beauty. This is the reality. We're living in a fabricated world of bullshit. Facebook also. Everybody goes in there, they Photoshop themselves, and it's madness. As you can see, Mr. Toolbag over there. You can clearly see what happened over there. They made his little penis bigger. Slide. And look, people like Justin Bieber, I'm just giving him a hard time. In a way, he's not consciously aware, at least in my opinion, of what he's actually a part of. Again, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarettes. It's obvious what they are suggesting there, that it's healthy. And this worked back then. It's funny now, but it worked back then. Just like there's certain things we don't recognize that in the future they're going to say, how the hell couldn't they see how obvious that was? Slide. This is a perfect example of how they use subliminal messages, or how it's just indirect advertising. This is from the movie E.T. Does everybody know, obviously, about the movie E.T.? This is the clearest that you get to see this bag. Can anybody make out what that bag is? Except for you, damn it. Anybody else? This was Reese's Pieces, which at the time was an unpopular candy. Nobody really knew about it in the United States. This was the briefest amount that you saw, and then he put a trail for E.T. Their sales skyrocketed, and they became one of the most popular brands of candy. It was a couple of seconds. People didn't even recognize it consciously. Even if we're looking at it and it's still, you can't actually see it clearly. Companies pay $1 million to put cigarettes in movies. Now, we see this all the time. There's the cool guy, maybe it's in Fight Club or something. And then kids see this and they don't realize. They're trying to rebel. And then they'll decide to maybe smoke a cigarette. Little do we know we're actually conforming. Slide. Perfect example. $5 million for a Super Bowl ad. These are ads that run about 30 seconds. 30 seconds. And believe you me, they're making an investment. They're not doing it for the fun of it. Okay, there's been studies that have demonstrated just 30 seconds of watching television can put us in a hypnotic-like state. We switch from beta waves to alpha waves. We become highly receptive. Not consciously. Consciously we can say, oh, it doesn't faze me. But it's the subconscious, which is much more powerful. This woman over here, Lucy Hughes. Has anybody seen the documentary, The Corporation? Very good documentary. You can watch it on YouTube. I recommend checking it out. She created something called the nag factor. And what they did is they wanted to study how long does it take a child to nag their parents before their parents cave in, before they capitulate and make a buy, make a sale. Now, she wasn't doing this because she wanted to teach parents how to defend their children or to get them to stop nagging. She was teaching the kids how to nag. And what she found is their sales went up by about 300%. In the United States, and I'm pretty sure that this survey could be corroborated in many parts of the globe, little babies, before they can even write, before they can read, before they can speak, they can identify corporate logos. Slide. Over there, kids who can't even read recognize logos for McDonald's, Disney, and Toyota. This leads me to the father of public relations. Now, we're going to start with this man, because most people don't even know who that is on the end there. Most people know, who's this? Does anybody know? Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, which means they explore deeper parts of the mind. That man over there was his nephew. He was named one of the most 100 influential people of the 20th century by Life magazine, or one of the most influential Americans. And what Edward Bernays did was he took this occult knowledge, because occultism is when you have knowledge that other people don't have. And instead of using it to help, he used it to exploit people. They call him the father of public relations, which is to say the father of modern advertising. Give you a perfect example. Mind-blowing stuff. The big tobacco companies back in the day, they saw a huge demographic of potential customers, which were women. And back then, though, it was a dogma, it was considered a taboo, where women, it was frowned upon for them to smoke cigarettes. So they approached him and they said, listen, we have this huge demographic that we're missing out on. How can we tap into this? And he said, no problem. I have a brilliant idea. There was something called a Freedom Parade. And this was to celebrate North America's freedom. And what he did was, first, he got a bunch of journalists to attend there. And he said, I've got a big story for you. Just be there. And then he got a bunch of very good-looking young women, models, to walk in this parade. And he had two in the front, one over here, and one over here with a big banner. And the banner said, Torches of Freedom. And they all lit up their cigarettes. Now the connotation there is obvious. What is America's logo? The Statue of Liberty. The Torch of Freedom. The subtle suggestion there is, if you are against women smoking, you are against freedom. They took something that is actually toxic and made it feel like it's empowering. It's about freedom. But it never was. Slide. He was also part of the Committee on Public Information in World War I. And what they did is they put out massive amounts of propaganda to encourage people to go to war. A lot of them outright lies. In fact, on one occasion, in Nicaragua, once again a democratically elected government, there was a corporation called the United Fruit Company. Very, very big and powerful corporation. And a lot of their shareholders just so happened to be in the United States government and in the Central Intelligence Agency. And they wanted to overthrow this democratically elected government. They came into power because, again, he wanted to get rid of the United Fruit Company, which owned most of the land and was keeping everybody impoverished. And he wanted instead those profits to go to the people. And he had, again, a good plan to compensate the corporation. It was reasonable. Well, the CIA and the government of the United States didn't like it. So what they did is they went to Edward Bernays. And they said, we need you to develop a propaganda campaign to get everybody scared of Nicaragua, of the government there, so we can overthrow them. And they made this huge communism scare. Communism back then was like terrorism today. It was a way to justify invading other countries. And what took place is they did. They bombed the place and they overthrew him. This is an example. Now, it's very low-level propaganda today. This was in World War I. And this was supposed to be the opposition. Now, today, obviously, this is Mickey Mouse stuff, right? Mickey Mouse stuff. But they still got other ways of creating monsters. Might not be this vivid, but they can still create monsters in your mind. This was the guy that they overthrew in Nicaragua, Are Biologically Hardwired. This is the best example of how low the establishment and the system are willing to sink to in order to accomplish a certain goal. And it's difficult for us to apprehend because we come from a place where humanity and integrity, it's something very important to us. So people have difficulty comprehending this. But what they did, this was in the first Gulf War under George Bush Sr. They wanted to go to war with Iraq. But the people weren't really willing. And then this girl, this teenager came along named Nurse Naira. And she gave this heartbreaking testimony about how babies were thrown out of incubators, innocent babies. And over 200 or 300 of them died. This was done by the Iraqi army. But it was later found that the whole entire testimony was fabricated. It was a lie. It never took place. You see, they exploit our humanity to accomplish their goals. Now, I know this kind of stuff is angering. It's frustrating. And I want you to look into it. There's actually 2 documentaries you can check out. The one is from 60 Minutes. Now, the reason why I mentioned 60 Minutes is because at one time this was the most popular show on network television. You can't get much more mainstream than that. I do that so that people who have difficulty perceiving and interpreting this can go to an official source and say, okay, well, it came from 60 Minutes. And you can find it on YouTube for free. Oh, yes, this leads me to Operation Mockingbird. Has anybody ever heard of this operation before? Anybody else? Sure, okay. Operation Mockingbird was a program from the Central Intelligence Agency that began in the 50s. And their intention was to control the media globally. And they did. They controlled a large portion, not just locally in the United States, but all over the world. They operated like this for over 20 years without anybody knowing before it was discovered. And then they claimed that they would change. Because that's what the government always does, right? You get caught red-handed, then you're going to stop doing what you're going to do. And you'll notice, guys, while I'm in this presentation, I look at things from an international scope. Because we're all deeply connected. We are all very much deeply connected. Next slide, please. Yes, the Central Intelligence Agency, places like the Vatican, other organizations are always manipulating Wikipedia. So be careful looking for information in Wikipedia. I actually put this slide here because when you go look up Operation Mockingbird, and I want you to, you're going to go into Wikipedia, and a lot of it's distorted. But research deeply, it's an incontestable fact. Slide. And this really sums it up. Okay, this is Edward Bernays. This is in his book, Propaganda, page 37. It was written in 1928. And the reason why the book was called Propaganda is because today it didn't have that same negative connotation that it does. It developed over time because people became consciously aware of how we are being manipulated. And he wrote, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in a democratic society. Now, I want to be very clear on what a democracy is, because people think democracy is synonymous with freedom. It's not. It's synonymous with popularity. Okay? That's all it is. And when you live in a society where keeping up with the Kardashians is popular and people know more about celebrity gossip than they know about the actual ingredients in their food, democracy can be a very dangerous idea. And then he said, those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government. which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we've never heard of. Now, I know when you hear this, if you aren't used to this information, the term conspiracy theory comes to your mind because we've been conditioned to react in that manner. And that's why I decided to include a couple extra quotes to make sure that everybody knows this isn't conspiracy theories. This is conspiracy facts. This over here was one of the presidents of the United States, one of the most popular. I've already checked out the sources. I've fact-checked it. This is an authentic letter. The real truth of the matter is, as you and I know, and he's writing to a guy by the name of Colonel Edward Mandell House, as you and I know, that a financial element in the larger centers has owned the government ever since the days of Andrew Jackson. It's a long time ago, guys. Andrew Jackson was back in the 1800s. Slide. This is another president, Woodrow Wilson, the guy that I showed earlier. In his book, The New Freedom, Section 1, page 13. Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the United States, in the field of commerce and manufacture, are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. That's a proper quote. That came from his book. Go look it up. Now, I know this sounds very scary, right? Ooh. But as I go on with this presentation, I'm going to show you we are not the ones that should be scared. We are many and they are few. We just need to be woken up to what's going on. Another one, two-time prime minister. He wrote in his book, this is Benjamin Disraeli. So you see, my dear Coningsby, that the world is governed by very different personages from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes. Now, his book was rumored to be about Nathan de Rothschild. And this is what it's essentially about, guys. I mean, aside from manipulating us to buy their products, because at some point, you don't need all that money. They control the very concept of paper fiat money. It's about keeping us distracted so that they can live these extravagant lifestyles and we can serve the purpose of worker ants. And this takes me to the Gladiator Games. Does anybody know why they were actually put, the political reason why they were put down? Has anybody ever heard the term circuses and bread? So what took place, I presume we all know about this. You know the movie Gladiator, where you go, oh, you're not entertained? Oh, you're not entertained. Now that was actually very real because back then, it was all about entertainment. Because Rome before was an empire, it was a republic. The people actually had a lot of rights. They were actually a very enlightened citizenry. And then a bunch of elite got together and they started to create distractions and start stealing people's freedoms. And next thing you know, it became this huge empire. And this is an old poet. It's from the 2nd century. Juvenal from it's a collection of poems, satire. The public has long since cast off its cares. The people that once bestowed commands, consulship, legions, and all else, now meddles no more and longs eagerly for just two things, bread and circuses. And what that means is at one time, these civil servants, because that's how they started out, as our civil servants, the people gave them their power. But now they just want circuses and bread. They just want entertainment. And we still have that today, guys. We just may not perceive it in those terms. And I'm not just talking about television. It can be sports entertainment. It can be pornography that's everywhere. It can be a wide variety of things that just keep us distracted. And I know about these rapacious influences because I come from an addictive background. I was an alcoholic. I was a drug addict. I was addicted to pornography. I did all of these things because I was trying to escape the deeper-rooted problems that I didn't perceive. One of the foremost intellectuals of the 20th century, George Orwell, again, writing about this, 1949, in his famous book, 1984. Now, for those who don't know who George Orwell is, I imagine a few of you have heard of George Orwell. He's becoming more popular now because he predicted the surveillance that's taking place globally. Heavy physical work, The care of home and children, petty quarrels with neighbors, films, football, beer, and above all gambling filled the horizon of their minds. To keep them in control, which is the ruling class, was not difficult. And that's really where a lot of us are. It's difficult, right? It is. Trying to put food on the table, maybe to escape all the bullshit, we watch some TV, and that's the condition right now. Now, it's going to go a bit deeper into the control that is exerted over society, over this matrix-like system. This is from Bertrand Russell's book, The Scientific Outlook, and it was written in 1931. Now, just so people know, this man is one of the foremost intellectuals of the 20th century. He was a Nobel Prize winner in literature. It's not a Mickey Mouse conspiracy theorist. It's not some random blogger. And he explains that. He goes through a little bit of the history of education. Education has two purposes. On the one hand, it's to form the mind. On the other hand, it's to train the citizen. The Athenians concentrated on the former, the Spartans on the latter. Now he explains, education in a scientific society may, I think, be conceived after the analogy of the education provided by the Jesuits. The Jesuits are a secret society that work for the Vatican. And he explains that they provided an education for the common people, but they had a special education for themselves. And that's how it's always been. They keep the true knowledge for themselves. And then he continues, in the future, the scientific rulers will provide one kind of education for ordinary men and women, and another for those who are to become holders of scientific power. Ordinary men and women will be expected to be docile, industrious, punctual, thoughtless, and contented. Of these qualities, contentment is the most important. Okay, you got to have people happy, otherwise they're going to rebel. In order to produce it, all the researches of psychoanalysis, behaviorism, and biochemistry will be used and brought into play. Okay, this is another individual over here. Once again, one of the foremost intellectuals of the 20th century. Also nominated on several occasions for the Nobel Prize in Literature, Aldous Huxley. This was an interview with Berkeley, March 20th, 1962. You can find it easily online. And what he says is there will be, in the next generation or so, a pharmacological method of making people love their servitude and producing dictatorship without tears, so to speak. Producing a kind of painless concentration camp for entire societies, so that people will in fact have their liberties taken away from them, but they'll rather enjoy it, because they will be distracted from any desire to rebel by propaganda or brainwashing enhanced by pharmacological methods, and this seems to be the final revolution. Okay, this is not some Mickey Mouse conspiracy theorist. These people are as legit an authority that you are going to find. And it's important to use these people when you are trying to get through to the people still plugged into the proverbial matrix. And now the United States, it was a friend of mine that actually said it, we were just talking in discussion. I don't think he truly comprehended the ramifications of what he said. He was like, the US to me sometimes feels like an experiment. And in many ways it is. It's like a controlled experiment. Nearly 60% of all people in the US are taking prescription drugs. That's an alarming number. That's an alarming figure. Big Pharma. Now, Big Pharma is the pharmaceutical companies. This is a multi-billion-dollar business. And unfortunately, they stay in business by keeping people sick. They need to have a demand. Big Pharma spends more on advertising than research and development study finds. That's atrocious. Instead of trying to cure people, they are concerned with just marketing their drugs. And this, again, and I'm not saying that it's one size fits all. There are conditions where people truly need to be on pharmaceuticals, I believe. But it's becoming a bandage fits for all. I know when I was younger, they wanted to put me on Ritalin. Right? When I was depressed, I remember I was so depressed, so anxious. Has anybody in here ever had a panic attack? Like a legit panic attack? Anybody? It's the most horrible feeling you can imagine, guys. You feel like you are going to die. You feel like you're having a heart attack. It's horrible. You want to just escape it, and you can't because it's inside you. And what I found with these panic attacks was that the only way out was suicide. That's what I started to think to myself. Because we like to just be free and happy, right? It's a human want. It's a human need. And then I said, I should go get medicated for this. Because I didn't have the knowledge that could set me free from what was actually going on in the society, in my own life. And luckily, I ran into a book that changed that, which I'm going to get into later. Now, this is crazy stuff. This individual here, scientist Tyrone Hayes. Okay, he was contracted by Syngenta, one of the biggest GMO producing and chemical fertilizer herbicide companies in the world. He did this mind-blowing research into one of the world's most popular herbicides called atrazine. And what he found, and this is found it's the most prevalent pesticide found in the drinking water, not just our drinking water, but in the ground, which means that the food that we're eating is getting that as well. And what they found was, in a study on male frogs, is that they were turning into females. So why is this significant? Because biologically we have a similar response to these frogs. So if it's affecting them in an adverse way, it can have an effect on us in an adverse way. Now for myself, the way I judge character is one way and one way alone. I don't care your skin color. I don't care what country you come from. I don't care what gender you affiliate yourself with. Integrity is the only measurement of a person's true character. But this should lead us to question why so many people are confused about their gender. Because these frogs literally turn into females. That is mind-blowing, guys. It's not about an ethical question. This is about a question of science. And they bullied this guy into silence. They tried to threaten his family. Mind-blowing stuff. Oh yes, porn. I didn't even know that I was addicted to porn for a long time when I was younger. I grew up watching porn. When I was small, I was exposed to porn when I was like 8 years old. Back then it was just magazines. Yeah, when I was a little kid. And now, because I have knowledge. You see, when you have knowledge, you have vision. You can understand. I found out, I was listening to a scientist, and he explained that when a child sees pornography, it's literally like having their brains raped. It sets the pathways for future addictions and traumas. Total visits to Pornhub last year, 23 billion, 2.6 million per hour. This is very widespread, and people don't realize that pornography addiction, these are new studies that are showing this, leads to the same brain activity as alcoholism or drug abuse. Now, I can tell you as somebody who's a former addict, that this stuff, when you are an addict, you don't think clearly, you don't think rationally, you do stupid shit that you would not otherwise do. Again, just to explain how it's like an experiment for them to see how they can manipulate and control people, because that's really what they're obsessed with, guys. They want to know how to control the population. And I don't want you to freak out. Let me finish with the presentation, because as you're going to find, by the end of this, we have the power, not them. Over here, Facebook got caught conducting a secret psychological experiment on users' emotions. So some people, they would just show them depressing news and see how they would react. Some just positive. Yes, and this again going to the pharmacological control of society. This is the Tuskegee Experiment in the United States. They deliberately infected black men with syphilis. And they ended up dying, a lot of them. Okay? Untreated for syphilis for 40 years for research purposes. A public outcry ensued after it was discovered, and the Tuskegee Experiment study ended 3 months later. The men filed a lawsuit that resulted in a $9 million settlement, which it doesn't bring back a loved one's life. Doesn't matter the price. And then President Bill Clinton formally apologized years later. This is unconscionable. Okay? It is completely wrong. And I don't think I have to explain that. These are innocent people. Doesn't matter what you think about them. Doesn't matter if you are racist. It doesn't matter. These are human beings. Another one in Guatemala. Same thing. Same thing. And who do we find here? In the background, the Rockefeller Foundation. They claim to be engaged in philanthropic work. And a lot of us believe that stuff because it sounds legit. Non-profit. Ooh, that must be a good thing. Health research. That must be a good thing. They're donating their money to health research. They're donating it to education. No, they're donating it to find out how best to control the population. Human experimentation scandal. So this is again with the Rockefeller Institute in New York City, Noguchi. And he, again, did the same thing. He injected and extracted syphilis. And you can see, children between 2 and 18 years old. What kind of a human, what are you to do that kind of stuff? It's mind-blowing. Again, I mean, everybody says they want to move to the United States. I live there. Now, don't get me wrong, my experience is not all-encompassing. But that government, you think this government is bad? This government is amateur. They are professional. Conducting lethal bacteria tests, biological warfare on their own population. That's crazy stuff. It's insane. And don't get me wrong, this is not relegated to the US alone. I don't want to make it seem that way because it's not. This is a practice employed by governments all over the world. It's just we know more about it from the United States. And I tend to use them as an example because people revere the country or the government as if it's this great. It's not, guys. It's not. It doesn't work like it. This was pretty mind-blowing stuff. This is probably, and this is going to be the most difficult for you guys to really be able to interpret it. And I know this stuff can be overwhelming if you're not familiar with it. It can be scary. You can experience a wide variety of emotions. But one of our problems in society is we are running from truth. And truth is an uncompromising power. Either we fall in line with the truth, we say this is the truth, and we bow before the truth, or we live a lie. And right now as a society, we're living a lie. This over here is the Mkultra Program. Has anybody heard of this? Okay. This was by the Central Intelligence Agency. Started in the 50s. A lot of those programs that I spoke about earlier about injecting people and experimenting them on stuff and stuff like that, it was under this umbrella. Now the crazy thing about all of this is taxpayer money is being used to do this stuff. I know it's sick. I feel bad to even impose you guys with all this information, but there's a part in the Matrix where Morpheus finally contacts Neo. And in ancient Greek, Neo means new one. And he's been looking for Morpheus. You know, in the beginning, he's sleeping on his computer, but he's searching, but he's sleeping. It's symbolic of us. We're sleeping, but a lot of us are searching for the truth. And eventually, Morpheus calls him. And he goes, Morpheus, is this you? And he says, yes. He says, look, I don't know if you're ready for what I have to show you, but unfortunately for you and I, we've run out of time. And right now, I need to show you guys this. We need to come to terms with what's going on. Because in order to overcome a problem, any problem on the individual level or collectively, we have to become aware of it first, right? If you got a hole in the ceiling of your roof at home, if you decide to pray or think positive about it, is that going to change the fact that you got a hole in your roof? No. You have to take positive action. Sure, maybe you can meditate and then when the rain and stuff comes, it won't faze you too much because you got control over yourself. But in life, the only way to get through a problem is to deal with it and then overcome it. The program engaged in many illegal activities, okay, both on Canadians and United States citizens. They experiment with chemicals, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, verbal and sexual abuse, and forms of psychological torture. This was undertaken with the help of 80 institutions, including 44 colleges, some of the most prestigious universities in the United States, I'd like to add, as well as hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies. That is, I'm not trying to scare you, but it is very disturbing when the people you think you're going to help for are potentially conducting experiments on you. And this leads me to, and this is what I was saying was going to be the most difficult for people to probably believe. But all of this stuff can be found online. And what I would like, if you guys really are skeptical, because I know it can be difficult. I've had years and years. I've done this for a long time. This has been my living for a long time now. And I've had a long time to kind of assimilate it into my mind and get familiar with it. And then you can step away if it's too much. You can step away and avoid it because it can be too much. You start to feel anxious and horrible. But if you need to, come to me and I'll give you the sources as well if you have difficulty finding them. In this study over here, this was in the 50s, guys. In the 50s. They took a woman who literally had an aversion for guns. She did not like guns. And they were able to hypnotize her into carrying out a hypothetical assassination. And she had no recollection. This is the proper document. Okay, you can find these documents online. That propaganda about fake news and stuff, that's to scare you from venturing into the realm of the internet. There's a lot of good information out there. There's a lot of bullshit, but there's a lot of good information. And as you see, Miss deleted. Now, deleted is, you can see where they always do that on classified documents. Was then instructed, having expressed a fear of firearms, that she would use every method at her disposal to awaken the other lady. And failing this, she would pick up a pistol and fire it at her. She was instructed that she would not hesitate to kill the other lady. And then it says, she carried out these suggestions, including firing the unloaded gun at this other woman. After proper suggestions were made, both were awakened. Miss, whoever, expressed absolute denial that the foregoing sequence had ever happened. I know what this sounds like. It sounds like a conspiracy theory. It sounds outlandish. It sounds impossible. But this happened in the 50s. And what that means is these lone nut shootings, and shortly after this took place, there was a string of assassinations, JFK, MLK, John Lennon, RFK, Malcolm X, a large amount that we have to ask this question about. This one is another crazy one. So they took two young women. They may have even been teenage girls. I don't really feel like reading all of this. Okay, both subjects were placed in a very deep trance state, and while in the state, the following instructions were given. She was instructed that upon awakening, she would proceed to a room where she would wait at the desk for a telephone call. Sounds like a science fiction movie, right? You get a phone call, and then all of a sudden they say something, and you're in a hypnotic state. Upon receiving the call, a person known as Jim would engage her in normal conversation. During the course of the conversation, this individual would mention a code word. When she heard this code word, she would pass into a SI trance state, but would not close her eyes and remain perfectly normal and continue the telephone conversation. So it's not like a movie, because when you watch a movie, it's over-dramatized, and they go, but that's not happening. She was told that upon conclusion of the telephone conversation, she would carry out instructions. She was shown an electric timing device. She was informed that this device was an incendiary bomb and was then instructed how to attach and set the device. After she learned how to set and attach the device, she was told to take the timing device, which was in a briefcase, and proceed to the ladies' room. In the ladies' room, she would be met by a girl whom she never had seen, who would identify herself by the code word New York. She was then to show this individual how to attach and set the timing device, and further instructions would be given. That the timing device was to be carried in the briefcase to such and such room, placed in the nearest empty electric light plug, and concealed in the bottom left-hand drawer of the disk. With the device set to 82 seconds and turned on, the experiment was carried out perfectly without any difficulty. Again in the 50s. They brainwashed two unsuspecting people, it was one or two, into carrying out the planting of a bomb. Right? This challenges our fundamental view of how the world works, and it should. What is the end game? What is this all about? Right? What is this all about? I mean, yes, we know they want to control us so they can live their outlandish lifestyles, that they want to make some profit, etc. But what is it about? And they're obsessed with one world government. They want a global form of government, one that is largely unaccountable. And if we don't become aware of what's going on, it will end up that way. But if we become aware, guys, we outnumber them by at least 1,000,000-1. And they are weak. They are weak at their core. Because you know why? Weakness must conduct itself in the darkness of deception. If you are truly strong, you can do what I'm doing now. You can just speak, because you're speaking truth. You have nothing to fear. And he said over here, this was James Paul Warburg, son of Paul Warburg, who was the architect of the Federal Reserve Bank, which is a private central bank in the United States that really controls the government. and close with all of the other elite families. And he said very candidly, and this, again, you can look it up, it's a legit quote, "We shall have world government whether or not we like it. The question is only whether world government will be achieved by consent or by conquest." Now, he's just talking loud because he knows that most people don't know what's going on. This guy's a Mickey Mouse. Look at him. Slide. Another guy, David Rockefeller. He wrote this in his own book, Memoirs. Chapter 27, Pride Internationalist, page 406. "Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interest of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure." Now, I know when you aren't familiar with their use of language, because language by and large is used to conceal the truth, to manipulate. He's saying integrated global political and economic structure, their system, to make it stronger. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty and I'm proud of it. Now, you may think that I'm reading a bit too deep into that, but when you become familiar with how these people's minds work, it's easy to interpret their intention. This guy, Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time, page 324, Professor Carol Quigley. He was actually the professor of President Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton actually mentioned him in one of his speeches. And he explained in his book that the powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. The system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world acting in concert, by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. Okay, this guy was given access to a lot of these elite institutes. They actually like him. And he wasn't against what they were doing. He just thought that the world should know about it, like a pride kind of a thing. They operate on another mental faculty. And this is how the system works, right? There's all of us here at the bottom, like the worker ants. And then at the very top, it's money. So there's many different forms of control we discussed here. The education system, we discussed television, public relations, marketing, etc. But at the top, the greatest control of all, above and beyond anything else, is money. Because food, water, land, all of these things are actually controlled by money. And what is money? Has anybody ever asked that question? What's money? It's paper, fiat, or it's digits in a computer screen. It has a collective imaginary value. And it's a relatively new system. In the past, they've used things like tally sticks. They used a stick as currency. This is a relatively new system in terms of world history. And it really has. It has an imaginary value. In the past, I could take my notes to a bank and I could get gold for it, or I could get silver. But you can't do that today. Today, it's a delusional system, and we're all operating on it. And this is the product of the insane asylum that we're living in. This matrix likes the system. They did another global survey. Financial worries rank as the top causes of stress in the United States and globally. Now, I know I can relate to this. Who has ever experienced some financial difficulties? Don't be shy. I think we all have, right? And it's the most debilitating feeling in the world. I mean, you can't do anything when you're having financial difficulties. You can't think straight, you're stressing. And this was considered the leading cause of stress globally. It just turns out that a study found that money is the leading cause of stress in relationships as well. So you see, this tool, which injects artificial scarcity into the equation. And let's be clear, there's enough food in the world. I'm going to get into that in a little bit. There's more than enough water. They're saying South Africa is in a water crisis. Saudi Arabia and a lot of countries in the Middle East have far less natural water reserves than us, but through the process of desalination, which is where you take the seawater, you convert it, they have drinking water. But they claim that they can't do that because there's not enough imaginary money. It's a question of priorities, nothing else. And then what is this money doing? It's creating division between us, competition, scarcity, relationship problems. This is from the United Nations own website. You can look it up. This report, I think, came out in 2008. And he says that it costs only $30 billion to feed the world's poor, to eradicate poverty. And then he called them out. He said, yeah, look, 1.2 trillion essentially is what it is. And it's important to understand, none of these organizations are definitively bad, guys. That's irrational to draw that conclusion. I would argue that most of them have good people. It's just at the higher echelons that they are bad. And he explained clearly, the problem of food insecurity is a political one. And to put that in layman terms, it means they don't give a F. That's what it means. That it is a question of priorities in the face of the most fundamental of human needs. Right? This is a deliberate policy, is what I'm trying to explain to people. This didn't happen by accident. They always say, oh, the government's failing. It's incompetence. And that's nonsense. Every year, 1.3 billion tons that we know of is being wasted of food. Have you ever heard that half of the world is obese and the other half is trying to lose? I mean, it's starving. It's just poor management, and it's deliberate poor management. This is from the United Nations World Water Development Report, page 7, 2015. Unfortunately, I couldn't get, I always try to get the newest statistics I can. The fact is, there is enough water available to meet the world's growing needs, but not without dramatically changing the way the water is used, managed, and shared. Now, they're not even talking about the process of desalination. The global water crisis is one of governance, much more than of resource availability. And the final one, people is, the world's overpopulated, that's the problem, yeah. People are just eating and breeding and too many kids. This individual over here, award-winning statistician, Professor Hans Rosling, has already proven, boom, it's nonsense. And anybody that's done even a little bit of a traveling around the world to different parts, if you've even gone to Cape Town, to the wilderness, to different parts, there's plenty of land. I would argue, and I would argue very seriously, that there is more than enough land for there to be twice as many people that are on this planet right now. If we simply start to use our technology, and we have great technology, to bring food and water to the world. Slide. Now, I'm going to get into what's going on in the modern day world. All of this terrorism, right, seems like it's a new phenomenon. This is history repeating itself, guys. This already happened, but because we aren't given authentic education, none of us are even aware of it. This was in Italy, 1980, and there were a string of attacks. A string of attacks. Another one. String of attacks. And yeah, one of the Italian senators speaking about it. Between January 1st, 1969 and December 31st, 1987, there have been in Italy 14,591 acts of violence with a political motivation. It is maybe worth remembering that these acts have left behind 491 dead and 1,181 injured and maimed. In other words, senseless, seemingly senseless acts of terrorism and violence were a major problem over there. But it turns out that this wasn't an accident. That this wasn't an accident. The Central Intelligence Agency, the MI6, and secret agencies all around the world who work in concert created a program called Operation Gladio. Next time somebody says to you, that could never happen, they could never keep it a secret. This was kept secret for about 40 or 50 years before anybody became aware of it. And it spanned all over Europe. Massive program. And what they were doing, the cover for it originally was that during the Cold War, out of concern for Russia, they were going to have stay-behind civilian armies in case of an invasion. Seems legit, right? There's layers to truth, which you will find the further you go down the rabbit hole. Well, then what they found out was as time went on, see, stay-behind armies, best intentions, and it degenerated into a front for terrorism and far-right political agitation. And by doing this, what it essentially created was massive division, massive fear. There were so many events that took place. In Belgium, there was something called the Brabant Killers. These guys went to these shopping centers and they shot up everybody. They didn't steal any money. They were professional killers. And if you do the research into it, I've actually, because I can never get into how in-depth this is, I've written an extensive essay on this. You can find it on my website at newkindofhuman.com, called The Unadulterated Truth, a brief factual account of hidden history in our times. It goes into everything. Everything, facts, details, documents, etc. And what they were essentially doing was committing terrorism against the local population to scare them to giving away more freedoms. This individual, Kazi, do me a favor, see if you can click on the bottom there and get this video to play.
Attaccare i civili, quello che è il popolo, le donne, i bambini, le persone innocenti, estranee ad ogni gioco politico, per una ragione semplice, perché bisognava obbligare questa gente, l'opinione pubblica italiana, a rivolgersi allo Stato, a rivolgersi al regime per chiedere maggiore sicurezza. Il ruolo della destra d'Italia è stato proprio questo. Si è messa al servizio di apparati di Stato che hanno alimentato una strategia che giustamente è stata definita della tensione, in quanto bisognava portare la gente ad accettare in qualsiasi momento, nell'arco di un trentennio, dal 1960 al 1985-86, la possibilità di uno stato d'emergenza. Quindi la gente avrebbe barattato molto volentieri parte della sua libertà con una sicurezza, con la sicurezza di poter camminare sulle strade, viaggiare sui treni, salire sugli aerei, entrare in banca. Questa è la logica politica che sta dietro tutte le stragi, che rimangono impunite proprio perché lo Stato non può condannare se stesso o proclamare se stesso colpevole di quello che ha fatto.
He got caught. He got caught and he was sentenced to life imprisonment. And he went on record and he explained what was going on. He said, you had to attack innocent people, civilians, the men, the women, the children, to scare them into giving away their freedoms. If it doesn't work, it's fine. But I'm not taking anything out of context. I'll give you guys access to this video. He said it plainly, and he is in prison currently. And it's been verified. He's a part of the Gladiator structure. It's okay. This over here, very fascinating. Because at the time of Operation Gladio, and a lot of people haven't really suggested this connection, but to me, it doesn't seem like a coincidence. Who's ever heard of Operation Northwoods? Operation Northwoods was another covert program by the Central Intelligence Agency, and I chose to list ABC News because this is another massive mainstream outlet. To their credit, they actually reported on this. Ironically, just a few months before 9/11. In the early 1960s, America's top military leaders reportedly drafted plans to kill innocent people and commit acts of terrorism in the United States. Cities to create public support for a war against Cuba. They were going to use this as a justification to go for Fidel Castro. The plan reportedly included the possible assassination of Cuban immigrants, sinking boats of Cuban refugees, and hijacking planes. Blowing up a U.S. ship and even orchestrating violent terrorism in U.S. cities. The world does not work in ways that we think, my friends. I'm not going to get into 9/11 because that is a very, very deep rabbit hole. But what I will say is this. What took place with 9/11, more than 2,500 professional architects and engineers have gone on record as stating it's a fabrication. The government is lying. Family members of the victims have come forward and said the government is not giving them the truth. Professional pilots, people, high-ranking people within the government say it. Even the people that sat on the official 9/11 investigative committee report, they did it as well. This stuff is all legit. And you guys can come to me for the sources. I want you to know about this stuff. And the process of this is because you have to first undergo disillusionment and then empowerment. Now, disillusionment is difficult, but empowerment is enlightening. You have to go through both processes. Next slide. This over here, this was written by Trevor Aronson, award-winning journalist. The Terror Factory. And what he found was only 1% of so-called terrorists caught by the FBI are credible. Mind-blowing stuff, right? Again, challenges your very perception of the world. But in order to keep that multi-billion-dollar budget coming, they have a vested interest to create fear. And of course, there's different levels, just like any business. Some people want to make profits. Some people want to control things. And what they essentially do, I know everybody's a Muslim scares, evil Muslim terrorists. What they essentially do is they target impoverished Muslims. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that radical Islam doesn't exist. There is elements of that, absolutely. But for the most part, we're being lied to, we're being manipulated. And why is that? Could it be that there is still a form of religious warfare going on? People just aren't aware of it. The United States and the West are predominantly Christian. The places with the most resources are predominantly Muslim. Nothing new under the sun. It's all been done before. Take this, for example. The media reports ISIS nuclear plot. It never actually involved ISIS. These were FBI agents. I mean, you can even see this dude. This looks like Mr. Rogers, bro. Huh? Look at this guy. Putting in some overtime. And they claimed, oh, the nuclear material was foiled by ISIS. We're safe. The government kept us safe. Next slide. This woman over here, most important whistleblower of our time. Not Edward Snowden. Not Edward Snowden. This woman over here, Sibel Edmonds. She was in the FBI, and she was a translator. And she can speak a wide variety of languages. And what she found leading up to 9/11 was that there were, and I quote, intimate relationships between the government and members of Al-Qaeda, including Osama bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri. What happened? They censored her, they put a gag order on her, nobody in the media would talk to her, no book. She had to publish her own book. The government is intensely scared of this woman and what she has to say. And in my book, if you want to know the truth, you go to where the authorities are trying their best to silence that truth. Operation Gladio turned into a different operation as Islamic fanatic units that would create these terror events, thus the justification for NATO, CIA, US military intervention in the Middle East today. There's the source. I don't believe in dealing with conspiracy theories when there is an abundance of facts. Next slide. Does anybody know who that is? That is Osama bin Laden. And this was back when he was working with the United States government. Has anybody heard of the Afghan-Soviet War? This was a real article. Anti-Soviet warrior puts his army on the road to peace. Thank you, bin Laden. This really happened, guys. Can I tell you something mind-blowing? And I want everybody to check this out. On the morning of 9/11, George Bush Sr. and Osama bin Laden's brother, Salim bin Laden, were in a hotel at a conference together because they are belonging to a same corporation that just so happened to profit from 9/11, what followed therein. Next slide, please. This leads me to Gaddafi, right? Muammar Gaddafi. Now, at the time of this invasion, Libya had the highest standard of living in all of Africa. That comes from the United Nations Human Development Report. Highest standard of living. Education, public, highest standards, collegiate, university, was for free. And then what did they say? That he's a threat to world peace, etc. This man was the biggest opponent of Al-Qaeda. He was the first person to ever issue an arrest warrant for Osama bin Laden. And what happened in Libya? This is a CIA agent. Like I said, there's a lot of good ones in there. Although I don't agree with everything she says. The United States switched sides in the war on terror with what we did in Libya, knowingly facilitating the provision of weapons to known Al-Qaeda militia and figures. Slide. He even said this openly. This guy was a member of the LIFG, the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group. They were recognized by the United Nations, the United Kingdom, and the United States as being an officially proscribed terrorist group at the time that they were arming them. And he even said, my fighters have Al-Qaeda links. And they still funded them in front of our faces because we don't have knowledge. Slide. What happened afterwards? Al-Qaeda flag flown above Benghazi courthouse. And Libya today is a madhouse. Okay, and it's being used as a central hub to destabilize surrounding regions. Tunisia attack, boom. And our fighters from there are going into Syria. Next slide, please. They insist on calling them rebels, even though they beheaded a little kid on camera. You can actually see this on YouTube. Not that you want to, but you can actually see it. And they insist on calling them rebels. Next slide. This is an official declassified document from the Defense Intelligence Agency to remove any doubts of what I'm trying to suggest. And what it says, The Salafists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and AQI, Al-Qaeda in Iraq. That was the predecessor to ISIS, okay? They decided to call themselves ISIS because it's really predicated upon geography. They want more land, so now they call themselves ISIS. The West, Gulf countries, and Turkey support the opposition. That is the opposition, while Russia, China, and Iran support the regime. The regime is the Syrian government. What's going on is the West is actually supporting terrorists. That's a reality. Now, I'm not saying that the good guys are Russia and China, and it's not a black and white issue. You know, we were raised on movies, and we tend to think that there's this bad guy and the good guy. It's a lot more complex than that, right? It's not that one of them is bad. All of them are potentially bad. And it says the situation unravels there is the possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality. Salafism is extremism, okay, in eastern Syria, and this is exactly what the supporting powers of the opposition want. I think this is from 2009, 2011, a long time ago. They knew what was coming, and not only while they did support them, but they definitely let it happen. And there's the source, Judicial Watch. You guys can come to me for all of the documentation. Next slide.
I'll tell you what I heard from the Syrian people that I met with, Jake, walking down the streets in Aleppo, in Damascus, hearing from them. They expressed happiness and joy at seeing an American walking through their streets, but they expressed a question. They said, why is it that the United States, its allies and other countries are providing support, are providing arms to terrorist groups like al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, Arar al-Sham, ISIS, who are on the ground there raping, kidnapping, torturing, and killing the Syrian people, children, men, women, people of all ages. They asked me, why is the United States and its allies supporting these terrorist groups who are destroying Syria when it was al-Qaeda who attacked the United States on 9/11, not Syria? I didn't have an answer for them.
Obviously, the United States government denies providing any sort of help to the terrorist groups that you're talking about. They say they provide help for the rebel groups. Tell us more about...
The reality is, Jake, the reality is, and I'm glad you brought up that point, because this is an often talked about thing by people like Adam Kinzinger and others saying, well, we've got to support the moderate rebels. Every place that I went, every person that I spoke to, I asked this question to them. And without hesitation, they said, there are no moderate rebels. Who are these moderate rebels that people keep speaking of? Regardless of the name of these groups, the strongest fighting force on the ground in Syria is al-Nusra or al-Qaeda and ISIS. That is a fact. There's a number of different other groups. All of them essentially are fighting alongside, with, or under the command of the strongest group on the ground that's trying to overthrow Assad.
So you see, this has been going on for a long time, guys. This is not something new. We just aren't aware of it. I know it's difficult to accept this, but that's why I want you to research it. Because I guarantee you, after this, it's going to just probably go to the back of your mind because it's a lot to process. But if you research it on your own, then you start to really apprehend what's taking place. Slide. So this is what they want us to be. Consumer society. Right? Working in cubicles. This is what they want us to be. Okay, it's not by accident. An enlightened citizenry will never have these kind of places that are deliberately giving us unhealthy foods and stuff. It wouldn't happen. Slide. Sports entertainment. And I'm not saying that it's all bad. I enjoy watching the MotoGP. But when it becomes something that you're using to escape this world, to distract yourself from what's really going on, it is a problem. Slide. Okay, so what they want us to be. Blind, obedient. That's what our society is predicated upon. Slide. Black Friday. Okay, so this is the present state that we're in right now. This is the present condition that the human race is in. But is it the result of who we are naturally? Is that our human nature? Or is this the result of the madness that is going on in our society? Again, it's an epidemic. But is this human nature? So who are we? What is our true nature in absence of all of this madness that is distracting us from what we truly are? What's my purpose? Am I what They tell me on TV. I mean, people always mirror what they see on TV. I see black Africans talking like Americans. Where does that come from? It comes from watching television. We are getting the concept of our identity from external sources. It can be a religion. It can be our culture. It doesn't always mean it's a bad thing. If it gives you strength and it allows you to be a better person, then I advocate that. But we are much deeper than that, which is what I'm going to explain now. This is a perfect example. This is the same person. This was in the United States. They found that they could not subjugate the rebellious spirit of the Native American population. So what they did was they set up schools that they forced them to attend, and they Americanized them into a second-class citizenry. Look at that difference. They even changed their names.
And I want people to understand that this is happening to all of us in the world today, regardless of your skin color, your ethnicity, or your background. They don't want any of us to be in touch with our true nature, because who and what we truly are is a threat to their system. If they can make us forget our true nature, then they can control us with ease. Again, this is indicative of our true nature. Problem-solving creative geniuses. And this is obviously in conflict with a system that requires blind obedience to conformity. And this leads me to another brilliant study about our true human nature, conducted by this guy over here, Professor Paul Bloom from Yale University. And what he wanted to find out was, is morality something that we're born with, or is it something that we learn? And his findings are summarized in this article from Scientific American as follows. They ask, what would you say are the moral principles which young children share? To which he explains, an understanding that helping is morally good and that harming, hindering, or otherwise thwarting the goals of another person is morally bad. A rudimentary sense of justice and understanding that good guys should be rewarded, but bad guys should be punished. An initial sense of fairness, in particular that there should be an equal division of resources, and alongside these principles are moral emotions including empathy, compassion, guilt, shame, and righteous anger. Now, these studies have been corroborated by a multitude of different studies, guys, on children as young as 3 months old. Okay, in relation to true human nature, this is the best study around.
This leads to the question of what really motivates human beings. Dan Pink, he really explored this question in depth. A multitude of studies into actually the workplace. And traditional, conventional thinking is that people want to make more money. That's what it's all about. That's what they want us to believe. But he found that autonomy, mastery, and purpose, that's the true drivers of our nature. The desire to direct our own lives. Freedom. We all want freedom, right? And what is at the foundation of that freedom? Just to have water, food, and shelter. That is the beginning of that freedom. And it's all, yeah. People say, oh, you can't have a system of welfare. We live on the welfare of this planet. This planet doesn't charge us anything. It's just that there's an elite who they think they're elite that can charge us everything. The desire to do something better and better, and the yearning to contribute. Those are pretty damn good attributes. I like freedom. I want to contribute something to my society. I want to improve myself. But what we find in society is degrading. This is in conflict with human nature.
Okay, this is who we truly are, guys. And it's unbelievably profound. Okay, we are born with a sense of justice, fairness, equality, empathy, and compassion, and we do not like evil. And then the other study, or the research conducted by Dan Pink, shows that we are not motivated by money or by this system which is clearly stressing us out, inducing depression, inducing suicide. No, we are motivated by the want to be free, to be self-determined, to contribute something positive to society, and the concept of self-improvement. And then the other research shows that we are born as creative, problem-solving geniuses. That's who we really are, guys. And that's incredible, truly remarkable. But this matrix-like system is trying to make us forget who we really are and our true power. Because absence of all of this indoctrination through the school system, through television, through pharmaceuticals, and whatever the hell else they might be doing to us, can you imagine what kind of a world this could be? Can you imagine if we all had our basic human needs of food, water, and shelter met, what we could accomplish? This world would be a very different place. I can tell you that much right now. Slide, please. But there is a controversial and widely misunderstood aspect of our nature that needs to be addressed, because in that study on the babies, what they found was that these little kids, these youngsters, when faced with a situation of obvious injustice, they would not only get angry with the person committing the injustice, they would even get violent. Now, whether we like it or not, this is a part of our nature, guys. We have a warrior-like nature that challenges injustice and wants to eliminate it. Now, the problem is, if we don't have knowledge and truth, guys, this can be used against us, and it actually has been throughout history. Okay, whether it was the Crusades or the more recent invasion of the Middle East, the ruling class have used their understanding of our true nature, of our warrior-like spirit, against us. And what they do is they'll create this fabricated image of evil and then tell us to support an invasion or whatever agenda they have to get rid of that evil, but they have ulterior motives. Now, of course, if we had knowledge, we wouldn't do this. And that's why it's so important to have unadulterated knowledge about what's really going on. Now, it's also important for people to understand that we are not just recklessly violent for the sake of being violent. Okay, we only become violent when we perceive something as being evil. Otherwise, we don't actually like violence. Violence is not natural to us.
So people will say things like, oh, you know, human nature, we're just violent. People don't understand what human nature is because their minds have been so raped and distorted. But if violence was so natural to us, why is it that we find, in the United States, for example, the world's foremost military empire, that 20 veterans are committing suicide every day? They have severe cases of post-traumatic stress disorder. I had that too. I come from a background of uncanny violence. My family that I grew up into was a violent home. I've been arrested on multiple occasions for violence. I've been in about 50 to 100 street fights, and I can tell you throughout that process, I've never really enjoyed it. Yes, if it's fighting and then afterwards you can have a drink together or you can be friends or whatever, that's fine because that's something else. Or if it's competition, you know, like professional competition. But nobody likes the feeling of having an enemy. Who of you guys ever had that anxiety of being faced with conflict or an enemy? Did it feel good? Listen to what's inside, not outside. Outside is trying to tell you who you are. Inside will tell you who you are. Slide. Again, slaughterhouse workers killing animals. Psychological damage. They have massive cases of post-traumatic stress disorder. Because we are empathic beings. We don't actually like to see innocent things, whether it's human or animal, getting harmed and hurt. These are pretty damn admirable qualities, right? And you know why you think that? Because you're a human being. It's deep in you. It's who you are. Slide, please. The biology of happiness. And this leads me to how we are biologically hardwired, which will tell you who you truly are. When you're happy, when you feel peaceful, how do you feel? You feel good. In fact, our immunity biologically is strengthened. On the other hand, if we're feeling stressed out, if we're engaged in violence and aggression, what happens? It can literally lead to us killing ourselves. It's connected to the two most prevalent causes of death in the world. Slide. So what do we need to do? We need to rehabilitate, my friends, because our true nature is not what we have been told to believe. Now, I know a lot of you are saying, well, you know, Gavin, I know about all this shit. This is just depressing. And it is pretty depressing. I agree. But you have to become aware of it fully before you can begin to address how to change.
Frederick Douglass, former slave, he was credited with this great saying that knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave.
Knowledge is empowerment, unadulterated knowledge. And that's what we're going to get into now. Slide. This book, yeah, changed my life. When I was suicidal and I wanted to give up, I was so hopelessly addicted and dependent on alcohol, I couldn't function in society. I couldn't even go to the store to get the alcohol that I needed to medicate myself because I was trying to run from what was going on inside. And what I learned over here is neuroplasticity. Has anybody ever heard of neuroplasticity? That we have the ability to rewire our brains. We can overcome addictions and develop new habits in our brains. Slide. You have to flood yourself with empowerment. So we recognize now that we are being inundated with disempowerment, with rapacious and toxic influences that are trying to bring us down. So we have to realize, I'm not trying to make you paranoid. Most human beings are great human beings, but there is a small elite that have very sinister intent. So what we have to do is we have to counter these influences. Instead of watching some nonsense on television, watch a documentary about empowerment, about learning about the mind. I haven't watched TV in 10 years at least. I mean, of course, passing here and there because it's unavoidable. It's in shops, it's everywhere. You'll see it. But I make a conscious habit to watch documentaries. I've learned that this mind, if you feed it the right things, you can become very, very strong psychologically. And it's all of us. It's not just some of us. It's every single one of us. Slide. Harvard neuroscientist, meditation, for example. Excellent, excellent practice. It's not just some airy-fairy kind of thing that people think, these kind of people. It's not like it. Okay? It reduces stress and it can hardwire your brain. It can change your brain. This is how you deal with addiction, guys. This is how you do it. And it's difficult. It doesn't just happen overnight with depression and stuff. And actually the best way to reshape your mind, to really induce the process of neurogenesis and rewiring your brain, you have to venture into new territory. That's when the brain is most pliable in unfamiliar tasks. So let's say that you don't exercise and you're trying to stop drinking. Start exercising and replace it with drinking. Take small steps, small practical steps. Anybody can do it. And nobody can compromise with us but ourselves. That's the truth. Next slide. Yoga, another thing. Yoga is another thing that people can do. Slide. Regular exercise. Exercising for me was central to changing my life. And I didn't know at the time because the research hadn't come out yet. So I would tell people, when you exercise, and it is true, that you get more oxygen to your brain. Right? On a very low level, on a childish level, it's about looking good. But that's Mickey Mouse. It's about feeling good. It's about feeling strong. Because you feed your mind chemicals that are associated with happiness. Slide. Another thing, what we eat. People don't realize how important it is what we eat. Because when we eat different foods, there is a genetic code in these foods, and they interact with our genetics. If you eat crap, like for example, factory farming, do you know what these animals are going through before we are consuming them? They are being tortured to death. Go look into it for yourself. The World Health Organization directly linked factory foods to cancer. And it's no surprise they're being pumped with antibiotics because we are enslaving them and using them basically as just something to eat, not respecting the fact that they have thoughts, feelings, dreams, families, just like we do. And then at the same time, when they're being tortured, they have the same biological response as we do. You're consuming that energy. Slide. This is a profound quote from a great, great man, an underestimated, underrated activist, the real Patch Adams. Who's ever seen the Patch Adams movie? Great, great movie. And then I had to find out about who the real guy was. Truly remarkable individual. Amazing. And this, for me, was my epiphany as well. In one year, when I was 18, I was hospitalized 3 times because I wanted to kill myself. I didn't want to live in a world of violence and injustice. And in the third hospitalization, I had the realization that you don't have to kill yourself. You can make revolution. And that's why we are here. We are creative problem solvers. That's why we are. We are actually problem solvers. We are here to change the system. It's in our nature. Take responsibility for the energy you bring. No more excuses. Each and every one of us, we have to take responsibility for our choices. Because the power of choice is the power of creation. And I know it may seem overwhelming. Gavin, you are out of your mind. I'm going to start changing the society. I'm trying to put food on the table. I'm trying to survive to the next day. Right? But you can take responsibility of your energy and your decisions in the sense that instead of watching TV for an hour every day, go exercise. Start to build yourself up. Instead of having your mind be your enemy, have it be your friend. You can change your life. It's not a bullshit story. Anybody can do it by taking practical steps. Slide. This leads me to Roger Bannister. Who's ever heard of Roger Bannister? You've heard quite a few things, eh? It's good. Feed your mind. I like it. Roger Bannister, back in the day, was told, prior to him, that nobody could run a mile in under 4 minutes. They said it was impossible. Scientifically impossible. Roger Bannister didn't give a shit. And he came up there and look at him. Oh, one time, he broke the 4 minutes barrier. Something remarkable happened after he did that. It was like a month or two after, another person did it. And today, hundreds, thousands of people have done it, including high school kids. Because the only limitation that we have is in the mind. This entire system is built on our imaginations. Government has imaginary authority. Money has imaginary value. And we have imaginary limits. We have to start with the mind. Slide. Most people don't understand just how little we know about the human brain. To this day, science cannot fathom and comprehend the complexity of the human brain. Now, to translate that, what that means is we have no perceivable psychological limits. We don't know what this thing can do yet. And like I said, the plane, the internet, cars, all of these things came from the imagination. They didn't come from school, which is limited to knowledge. That's why Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. We are creators. And the good thing is with our imagination, although it seems that it gets dumbed out of us, it doesn't. Because every time we go to sleep, guess what happens? Whatever created us, which I believe something did create us, our mind, our imagination gets activated again. It can never die. It can only be suppressed. So we have to get in touch with our inner child. The key, if you want to change your life from the present circumstances, it starts with your mind. It might sound ridiculous, but that's how it starts. Bruce Lee, he wrote himself a letter when he was living in a basement. He said, I'm going to be one of the best martial artists of all time, the highest paid actor. I'll make this amount of money. He said $20 million or something. Now, if you heard that, you would think this little Chinese dude is crazy. He's crazy. How's he going to, this guy's living in a basement. And look what happened to Bruce Lee. It starts in the mind. Slide. And this leads me to Project Stargate, another undercover government program. And what they did is they studied ESP, remote viewing. Remote viewing is where you go outside of your body and you can go anywhere in the world with your mind. Sounds crazy, right? But again, until we can dismiss the limitations of the mind, nothing should sound crazy. Because the greatest limits being imposed on us is coming from the system. It's not encouraging it. Now, if we can start to change things and encourage it, and believe you me, we can do it individually, and by changing individually, you automatically change what you're putting into this world. If you feel like there's not enough kindness in the world, people tell me all the time, there's not enough kindness. The only way there cannot be enough kindness in the world is if you yourself are not engaging in kindness. Because people by nature will respond positively to your kindness. It sounds crazy, but we can all make a positive difference. It's the saying. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. It might sound corny, it might sound cliche, but it's the truth. Slide. And that, my friends, is how you escape the matrix. is by realizing that it has been put in place to exploit us. But we are infinitely stronger than it, and we have the ability to change it. It's within us to do that. Everybody has the capability of a Martin Luther King Jr., of a Malcolm X, of so many people that have changed this world in revolutionary ways. And although, yes, maybe they were taken out by the system, maybe they're not the best examples, what they did continues to live forever. Death is going to come for all of us. But how we live life now, it's a choice. Right? We have to shed our fear of our illusory limitations. And I can assure you right now, the way things work, as myself, who started my life over and over and over again from scratch. You can ask my cousin there. When I came back to South Africa, I had nothing. I had to live in a cottage, which I was very grateful for because I had nothing else. I had no job. I had no driver's license. I had no car. And doing this kind of work, as you can imagine, is not the most popular kind of stuff. But through incessant and uncompromising persistence, I found a way to make it work. And it's not just me. That's what I'm trying to say. This has applied to everybody else. The author of the Harry Potter books, first female billionaire, you know how she started off? She was living in poverty in England, and she would go to a coffee shop in the middle of winter because it was too cold to be in her home, and she would push her pram, her baby, so that she could try to get some sleep. And she would write the Harry Potter books. She would take one glass of coffee because that's all she could afford and sit there the whole day and write the books. Jack Canfield, multi-millionaire, author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books. He was turned down over 140 times. 140 times he was turned down. But he just kept on persisting, and then he succeeded. Can be done. It's not a certain person. It's not a certain demographic. You are so much more powerful than you know. And they fear the day that you find this out. Because you can change not just your life, but this world. So in closing, I know this can be overwhelming, all of this. It's a lot of information to take in. And rather than thinking you have to go out and try to conquer the world, which is an overwhelming task, realize that you just have to change yourself. It's a win-win situation. Start to dedicate energy and power to improving yourself. Thanks a lot, guys.
I'm trying to free your mind, Neo.